The topic of this panel is one very close to my heart because in February of last year I started getting bullied in school, which is unfortunately a very common statement being made by young people these days. This was one of the most difficult times of my life, and it was a time where I felt nobody understood what was going on, and it wasn't until after I came through the eye of the storm, so to speak, that I realised that people got what I was going through. I felt that if I hadn't shut everybody out that I wouldn't have been affected as badly as I was. But I wanted this discussion to happen so badly, and I wanted to talk about my experiences. I wanted to help people who were going through what I went through, because the truth is I didn't want anybody else to have to endure what I did. But unfortunately that's wishful thinking, and as much as we'd like it to happen, we can't put a stop to bullying. We can only kind of do things like this, but no amount of conferences and discussions can change the way that people act. Because in the end of the day, you can't change other people's actions, you can only change how you react to them. And the only person with the power to hurt you is you. I felt like to my friends I was glass and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to act around me, and I didn't expect them to know how. But this is what I feel is the biggest change that has to be made. Because because this panel to me is about teaching people how to cope with the feelings of their children and their friends, and to teach them, you know, it's okay that you're feeling this way, and it's okay that you're being upset by this. And it's just to let you know that things have changed a lot since you went to school, and if people here have been bullied, things are very different now. So, without keeping you for too long, I'd like to introduce you to Siobhan Cretan, who will share the panel this morning.
Thank you very much, Bríannagh. That was really, really great statement, and thank you very much for saying all those things. You're a very brave and resilient girl, and I know you'll really enjoy this session and you'll get so much out of it. And I know from talking to you earlier that your friends are all really jealous that you have these people here in Kilkilly, and we're all very lucky to have them and looking forward to hearing them speaking. So we have a great panel here this morning to discuss growing up in the 21st century, the challenges that it brings to today's adolescents and young people. Sinead Burke is a writer, broadcaster, fashionista, and so many more things. Her TED Talk, which I watched last week, is absolutely inspirational. I would recommend it to anybody. It's well worth 10 minutes of your time. It also brought her to Davos this year, to the World Economic Forum. So she's had a bit of practice for speaking at prestigious events like this today. So that will really stand her in good stead today, I think. Grainia is the Chief Executive of the Irish Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. She's a leading advocate for children on many, many issues. She's also going to be taking up a new post in Northern Ireland as Commissioner for Resilience later this year. Dr. Mairead Foody has done a lot of research in bullying and cyberbullying, and she's going to talk about sexting today and give some facts and figures around that, which I think will be very informative to everybody here. And then finally James Kavanagh, who is the sensation that Bríannagh and friends are really excited about seeing here. He's the guy that somebody described in the street the other day as that he's the guy from Snapgram. So he's big everywhere he goes, clearly. Anyway, this is going to be a great discussion, and I know we're all looking forward to it, so I'll invite Sinead to kick us off. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to be very brazen and bold and stand in the middle of the aisle. Thank you so much to Joan and all of the team here for the invitation. I have heard about women in media so fondly over the past number of years, and it generally is such an honour and a treat to be here. I'm currently undertaking a PhD in education and human rights, particularly about the voice of the child. So I don't know if you know, but Ireland as a country has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 12 says that children have a legal right to have a say about matters which affect them. Legally. My question to you is, how often do we listen to children? And not often, not only listening to them, but take action on the things that they speak on. Have we created a society in which children can come forward and be authentically listened to? I won't give you the answer. I imagine you already know. My background is in education. I'm a primary school teacher. And as regards to the challenges that are facing young people, a lot of it is societal. And a lot of the problems are not just instigated in this current millennial 21st century era, but they are behaviours and conditioning that has been inherited. My advocacy started because of a phone call from a parent to my parents. My parents, my dad is a little person, my mother is average height. They founded an organisation called Little People of Ireland in 1998, before the existence of the internet. They wanted to create a community that was a safe space for educational and social opportunities. But one day a parent came to my parents and said, my daughter, who's a little person, is being bullied in school. The older children in the playground are using Snapchat, taking videos and photos of her, undermining her and making her the butt of a joke, something which she has no control over. We've brought it to the school's attention. The principal and the teachers say that they do not have the adequate vocabulary to reprimand the children, but also make it a point of education. We as parents, we don't use these technologies, we don't know what to do. To which my mum and dad replied, Sinead's a teacher, she's guard about it, she can go down. And they did. And in many ways, what I realised in that moment was that the problem isn't the internet. The problem is people. Because as was very eloquently said earlier, why are we living in a world where people think it is adequate or that there is a currency to making fun, to harming others? And for me, it's about challenging that in lots of different ways. I think there is a responsibility from schools to educate themselves on the necessary vocabulary. There is a responsibility from parents to do the same. There is a responsibility from An Garda Síochána to ensure that the legislation and the services that they provide also cater to children. But I also think there's a responsibility for all of us to be empathetic. That the first time you see somebody who is different or challenged, your response isn't to laugh or to make fun. And I wanted to tell you one little instance that happened to me. I was walking down the quays in Dublin, very busy, I had bags everywhere. And a car pulled over. There was 3 young men in the car. They rolled down the window. They called me a midget and they took photos of me. My fear in that moment was not necessarily that they called me a name, because that's my normality. And I'm used to it. My fear was where those photos would go. When I told my mother, she tried to ease my nervousness and said, maybe they just really liked your coat. My coat was pretty fabulous, but it wasn't the reason. I rang the local Garda station and told them what happened, and the guard who answered the phone said, are you sure they meant you? I said, well, yeah, I am. I didn't get the response that I wanted, so I tweeted about it. And from then I was introduced to the Garda Diversity Officer of An Garda Síochána. And since then we've instigated a relationship, where I'm now doing training in Templemore to ensure that the next batch of Gardaí are trained with empathy at their core and much more understanding of what in breach of the peace looks like, what hate speech and hate crime legislation needs to cater for this next generation. So whilst I think very much there are challenges for the 21st century generation, for Generation Z as regards to social media, I'd also like to mention that it's not going away. And if we keep placing all responsibility on the technology and not on the skills that we need to provide young people with, we're not going to get anywhere. I'll speak more positively later, I promise.
I'm going to call on Grainia now.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Helen, and your team, and in fact, all of the young people who spent the weekend looking after us so well in this lovely home of yours. Thank you to them too. I want to tell you a little bit about what children and young people are telling us, because I can't agree more with Sinead in relation to the voice of the child. Everything that we do at the ISPC is essentially informed by the calls that we receive on Childline. We still get 1,000 contacts a day from children across Ireland who call us, and they need us to listen. And they may be children who are bereaved, they may be children who are sick, they may be children who are lonely, they may be children who want to talk to us because they're distressed, or they may be children who want to talk to us about everyday life issues. So we get a whole host of calls. And sometimes we get calls from children who aren't ready to talk. And they're the calls that we call our silent calls. And it may be 10 or 20 or 30 seconds where our job is to reassure that child that they have a right to be safe. And to Sinead's point in relation to rights, that's a key point that I think everybody in Ireland needs to understand and live and breathe. Every child has a right to be safe, and it's our job as adults to help them realise that right, to keep them safe where we can, but to understand that we have a proactive duty to keep every child safe, to protect every child. So I want to tell you a little bit about what young people and children are telling us about what life is like in Ireland. But I want to start by telling you about a story that was written, or an article that was written by a brilliant journalist, Elaine Byrne, in the Sunday Business Post recently, and it was called "Why is it so easy to harm a child in Ireland?" And she wrote the piece, and there's a line in the article where she talks about 60% of sexual offences in Ireland are against children. 60% of the cases that the Gardaí are investigating in relation to sexual offences are relating to children, young people under the age of 18. In a sample case, number of cases that the Garda Inspectorate report looked at, 4% of those cases resulted in a conviction. So something is happening in Ireland that is preventing us from the moment a child or a young person makes a really important decision, which is to disclose a secret, something that they have been holding on to that is profoundly affecting them. Something is happening between that moment and a number of milestones later on that is preventing us from protecting that child and realising that child's rights. And that thing is the institutions of the state that we said we would set up and we would embrace and we would support and we would invest in, because we said, didn't we, as adults, it would never happen again. How many times did we all say, when institutional abuse was uncovered in Ireland, it would never happen again? It is still happening to our children in Ireland, and our job is to decide what we do about it. And that report from the Garda Inspectorate that Elaine wrote about so brilliantly was a report into how we invest in the Gardaí. So we make a public policy choice. We put our money here instead of there. We are putting our money somewhere else, and we are choosing not to put our money into the protection of children. So why am I talking about in the context of all of this? Well, that same report also said, and not only are we struggling to respond to and protect children in relation to more traditional forms of risks or abuses to children, but we are nowhere near ready for the new and emerging risks that are being talked about today, that Bríannagh talked about so articulately at the start, that Sinead and my colleagues no doubt will talk about. The fact that children are increasingly at risk online in a whole range of ways, and that report talked about how important it is now that the state steps up and invests and does something completely different. And what's been missing so far from this has been the voice of the child. We have too often looked over the heads of children and young people and said, we'll fix it. And in a way, that's what adults do. That's our gut reaction. A child tells you a problem and you try and take that problem away from them and you try and solve it. And if we learn anything over the next few months, anything at all, as we try to grapple with a whole range of issues in relation to children's digital safety, what we need to do is start with them. We need to start by saying, what is the issue for you? What is your lived reality? And what can we learn from children and young people? And what we learn in Childline is, first of all, young people are just as concerned for their own safety as we are for their safety as parents. I'm amazed at the number of calls we get through Childline from young people who are calling not about themselves but their siblings, their friends, their cousins. They want to tell us that they're worried, they want help, and it's our job to do that, to respond to that. So what are they telling us? They're telling us we're worried. They're telling us we care about our data privacy. Again, there's been a lot of talk about the data protection and children's data protection. What have we done? We've talked over the heads of children, and we've decided as adults, here's what we're going to do. We need to turn that back around really, really quickly, and we need to do that fast and effectively. They're also telling us that actually they love their lives online, and in fact it's only people of a certain age who talk about online and offline. So I'm showing you my age by the fact that I say that, and I've no doubt that my colleagues on this panel are going to absolutely convince you of that. So we need to get away from that. We need to stop talking about taking things out of children's hands, and we need to empower them so that we can help them make the right decisions. And if you say that's naive, and some of you will tell me I'm naive, listen to the young people who are about to tell you how brilliantly, how important it is that we protect them by giving them the skills to make the right decisions. And one of the listening to young people, one of the things they tell us is, I'm bombarded with information, I'm bombarded with choices, and And this is difficult to hear, I know, but when I listen to Gardaí who work in this space, they tell me that 15 years ago, an adult who had a sexual interest in a child would spend a long time speaking to that child and convincing that child to talk to them. Adults can now contact children, several children at once, and can do that in a matter of minutes. And I'll say no more than that, but that's the life and the environment in which we live. So our job is to not just listen to children, but in as much as we can to equip them with the ability to make the right decisions online. And if they don't feel they can, that they can immediately know what to do. And I suppose that's one of the final points I want to make, which is the good news is, and I'm saying this as somebody with a very small baby, okay? So I am not saying this as an expert, but I listen to experts in my organisation every day. And here's what they tell me. So here's what Margie Rowe, the national manager of Childline, says. Children are no different now than when we established Childline 30 years ago. So that's the good news. In other words, here's what they want. They want love. They want nurture. They want stability. They actually want ground rules and boundaries. They want to be listened to, really properly listened to. When young people say to us, I really want to tell my mum this, but I know what she's going to do. She's going to freak out and she's going to take my phone away. And I just need her to listen to me. And that's what they're telling us. So in other words, we have absolutely within our grasp the ability to solve these problems, but we have to do it with children and young people, and we have to properly listen. And I never ever agree to go on radio shows and answer questions from parents because I'm not equipped to do that. But just one day I was bounced by a journalist, and he said, oh, well, that was a really interesting interview, Grainia. Can I put on your headphones? There's a parent who wants to ask you a question. And this parent had a problem, and we did our best. But one of the things I said was, have you asked your daughter how she feels? And the mother said, I've never asked her how she feels. Now, I am not making any judgment on that parent. I am figuring it out day by day. I'm about 5 minutes ahead on a good day, all right? But I guess my point is, that's a really good place to start. Asking your child and taking a breath and giving them a second. And silence is okay. And let them fill that silence and tell you in their own time. Can I finish very quickly, because I'm sure Siobhan is looking at her watch. I can't do my job without the people in this room. So the journalists who answer my calls when I'm really frustrated because a report has come out and I'm angry and somebody needs to hear and the public need to hear it. So I couldn't do my job without all those journalists. So I want to say thank you on behalf of me and my organisation for the support that you give and the fact that you do listen. Because my job is to take those silent calls and that gap when a child is trying to get the strength to tell us something important about what's happening in their life. My job is to get that story to you so that you can get it to the public. So thank you for answering my calls, often late at night when I'm really quite frustrated and I'm trying to get an issue to be taken seriously. And to all of the public who are here today, thank you also for supporting Childline, for supporting the ISPCC, and for helping us to listen to children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grainia. I think you very much addressed the point that Bríannagh made at the beginning, that young people are the people that to listen to in all of this, and everybody thinks they're wiser and they can offer advice and support, but their voice has to be at the centre of everything we do for them. I'm going to go to Dr. Mairead Foody now, who's going to speak about, she's done a lot of research on cyberbullying, and she's going to talk about sexting as well.
So I'm not going to focus too much on the research, and it's actually funny because listening to everyone and everything that has been said, the research, the one point I will say does support that we are not listening to our children, but I'll get to that in a minute. So there's a lot of research going on in the Anti-Bullying Centre in GCU around cyberbullying, traditional or offline bullying, and yes, we still maybe sometimes make the distinction even though we shouldn't because young people aren't. But I will just focus in on sexting because I think that's, up and coming and one of our fears for parents these days. So if I start off, I'll just say that one of the concerns I also have, or I do have, is just the way that when we talk about cyber issues, we often lump them all under the same umbrella. So for example, the case with Matthew Horan this year where he was convicted for exploiting a young 9-year-old and some of her friends into sending sexual images to him scared everybody. And what the media did, and what we all did in our own personal, probably Twitter and Facebook accounts, was we lumped that all under the umbrella of cyberbullying or the scary internet. And that's quite a normal thing to do. I just need to make the point though, that that's very, 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 very different to a 15-year-old girl choosing to take an image of her topless body and then maybe choosing to send it to her 15-year-old boyfriend. But legally, actually, they're both considered, in a sense, child pornography, surprisingly, in Ireland. So, again, that's a concern that I have, because if we do that, we sometimes then have this kind of knee-jerk reaction, where as parents and educators we say, okay, we need to take the devices away, take the phones away, so we can stop the sharing of images. And the research doesn't really support that that actual reaction has worked or has really done anything to support our young people. What the research does show is that education and skills are really the key strategy. So again, if we say education and skills, I mean for both young people in helping them navigate the risky online environment, but also their parents and the adults around them in helping them when they may possibly feel disappointed about what their child may have done or seen online. And if we talk about mental health, because I am a psychologist coming from a mental health background, the biggest challenge that I see is actually not that adolescents are choosing to take images of themselves or sexual images of themselves, because in a sense that does actually fit with the developmental profile of the adolescent's years. What I find scary is actually then the reaction that we may have as a society or as adults in that individual's life. So if we go back to the 15-year-old who's choosing to take an image of herself, and then we think about maybe her mother or her father's reaction on discovering that that image, that original image, which was probably shared consensually to start with, has been passed on and could even be in the hands of strangers. If we go to the child and think about the fear, absolute terror and isolation that she's feeling, and then we think about maybe the shame and guilt that we might naturally put on her in our reaction and our disappointment in her or him choosing to do that, we run the very, very risky line between trying to help our children and support them and maybe giving them even more mental health problems in their loneliness and their isolation. And I also just want to talk very briefly about consent, because if we are talking about the sharing of images, we can't do so without considering the really important or significant issue of consent. For some people, especially if you talk about older adults and not exactly adolescents, the issue for them or the concern for them is not the fact that they've taken a picture of themselves. It's actually that somebody has chose then to take that image and share it non-consensually to other individuals. And again, consent is the biggest issue there. In our research, we know that about 14% of 15 to 8-year-olds have had an image, a sexual image of themselves shared non-consensually online. And that's very scary. But for me, the scariest statistic is that when you ask those individuals what they do after that, after an image has been shared, a sexual image of themselves without their consent online, 50% say that they tell nobody, 48% say that they might speak to a friend or somebody their own age, and really the rest, maybe about 1% or less than 2%, may choose to tell an adult or a parent. So I'll just conclude by actually saying that what everyone else seems to be saying, and we haven't talked about this before, is just that we really, really, really need to open a dialogue with our young people. And we need to ask them to lead us on the challenges that they face in what will undoubtedly be a future online, no matter what we do about it.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to invite James Kavanagh. He's a leader in many ways, and people like Bríannagh and her friends are obsessed with what you say. So you have a big opportunity to influence, I suppose, the debate and to get them to encourage in this debate. So we'll be interested to hear from you now, James.
I can call it a leader. It means I have to live up to something now. I'm just doing my bits. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm usually kind of like I'm kind of a positive Pamela. I'm always kind of thinking about the kind of good things about being young and growing up and social media. And when I kind of heard the topic of today, it was, you know, what are the problems facing adolescents and young people. And generally, I'm kind of like, young people are deadly. Like they're doing amazing. And I think with each generation, there's a huge improvement in the way people think and the way people accept people with differences and that kind of thing. But like I think a lot of the problems that face young people are simple enough to kind of solve. And like from listening to all you guys' stories, there's like very common threads in them. You know, it's about empathy, it's about listening, it's about a bit of love, and it's about just kind of understanding young people and kind of I guess listening more. Like bullying kind of came up a lot, and that's something that I went through anyway. I was kind of bullied to bits from first year to third year. I was a gay. I'm still a gay. I couldn't hide it very well. So that was, I went to an all boys school. Now it is a good school, but back then there was not a huge kind of anti-bullying policy or whatever. I think things have improved anyway in the school, but I was picked on because of that, and I thought I was the only one in the world. I literally did. I went in, no one wanted to talk to me or be my friend, because then you'd be, oh, he's obviously a gay person as well, we're the witch. So I was quite alone. I'd go in, you know, at 9 a.m. and leave at 4 p.m. and then go home, and all the other ones would congregate and go to the cinema or go to Dundrum Town Centre and, you know, have friends. So from first to third year I was completely on my own, and I remember one day a note. One of my main bullies, he was, I always say he like should work in marketing or advertising, because he was really creative with how he would bully me. I was kind of like hurt, but then like, wow, you're really intelligent. So we'd invent new ways of trying to get at me every day. And one day he made a really beautifully ruled survey, and it was, how gay is James? And it was nicely ruled with different colours, and he attempted to pass it around the class, and I only realised this afterwards, but one guy stopped the note going around the class, and this was halfway through second year, I think, and he stopped the note going beyond him, and he said, no, I'm not going to say his name, don't pass the note around, like, go, you know, just crumple it up or whatever. And I actually got the note at the end from the bully, who had cleverly used one of those big pens with the 4 colours to make it look like 4 different people had ticked the box, but I seen what he was doing, so he didn't get away with it. But I always say, like, you know, there's always going to be bullies and badness, but like, be that one person, that guy David, who stood up for me, because it can make an incredibly lasting impression on you. And from that day forward, I was assured, oh my God, there's good people in the world. There has to be more Davids. And I was literally a new person from that day, and I know that sounds like completely dramatic, but I was a completely transformed person. I thought if he's good, then there's obviously other good people, and I went through life then, and I still talk about that one little instance. So be the person to kind of step in if you see someone getting a hard time, or if you see problems happening. And I think, you know, that guy David, I think he was obviously raised in a really good family and had good values enough to step in for a weakling like me who was getting bullied. He was obviously raised well. So I think kids and young people are completely a product of their environment. And I think it's up to parents, not just parents, but uncles. I have a niece and nephew. I'm a big believer in it takes a village to raise a child, and I think it's up to everyone to kind of input values and input empathy and make sure people are being raised correctly, and also about educating children. I think there's, when I'm thinking of problems kids are being faced these days, I think of like sex education. I think a really good sex education needs to be enforced across the land. I mean, I was talking to someone who works in the Gay Men's Health Clinic, and there's a big rise in STIs going around the place. And I know sometimes this can be a bit uncomfortable to hear, but I think it's the uncomfortable topics that are the ones that make the biggest change. There's a huge surge in HIV and STIs amongst the age group that aren't being taught about sex education in schools. So there's a complete correlation there. So I think that needs to be improved. I think obesity is a problem as well, and I think how we can tackle that is compulsory home economics and food science, alongside sex education, and obviously mental health as well is a big issue, and I think we're doing amazing work at chipping away at the stigma of that. So I think wellness kind of classes and stuff like that. So I think there's ways, really easy ways we can tackle these things, and it starts in schools, it starts at home, it starts with aunties and uncles who are helping raise the child, but otherwise I think people are doing great. And I think, to echo what you guys were saying, social media and smartphones aren't the problem, it's the people who abuse them, and it's about kind of showing kids that what is real and what is not real. I talk to my niece all the time about photoshopping and about the vast array of apps that help nip in the waist and elongate the neck and smooth the skin, and I'm kind of showing her that, you can spot this really easily if you look out for it. So that's how we can kind of maybe teach our kids about body dysmorphia. And I also think, people think, oh, Instagram is feeding a wrong image to young people. Well, we had magazines before that. It's just maybe this is the new thing. So there's always been that thing, but it's about raising a headstrong child and showing a child what's real and what's not real, and how to be empathetic and how to listen and how to love. So otherwise I think we're all doing great, and I think that I'm always positive about the next generation. I go around to schools a lot and I see them working on projects about trans rights and about Black Lives Matter and all these things that my generation hadn't got a clue about. So with each generation I think we're doing a great thing. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
I'm sure you'll all agree that has been fascinating and covered a wide range of topics. I know there'll be many questions, and I'm going to come to you very shortly to ask them, so please have them ready. There's just a couple of themes, I suppose. There's challenges for every young person, whatever generation they grow up in. I suppose the difference is that in this generation, a lot of it is online, and that's probably the newest and the scariest thing, probably for parents and for the young people themselves. And I suppose just earlier we were speaking, Sinead, and I think the whole online has been. It's a scary place, but it's also been a great platform to launch your life. So there's positives and negatives in it. And I know you give great advice about how to stay safe online. Would you like to talk about the opportunities as well as the threats?
Sure, thank you so much. One of the key challenges, I think, as regards to protecting children and young people online and making the internet a safe space, I ask you who's creating that legislation. I ask you how many of those individuals are on Snapchat, are on Instagram. And Grainia, as you very importantly said earlier, often we have these conversations over the heads of children. Within advocacy and academic circles, there is a phrase, nothing about us without us. And I would ask, if we are authentically trying to create a safe space on the internet and guidelines, we need a number of key individuals in the room. Primarily, those most affected, young people. But as aspirational as it sounds, we also need Jack Dorsey from Twitter. We need Mark Zuckerberg, because the difficulty is many of these bodies are working so far ahead that by the time legislation is created, it's out of date. So I would ask that we have a very important conversation within our governments and within our classrooms about that. But the internet, for me, as trite as it sounds, changed my life. I graduated as a primary school teacher and thought for 65 years that's what I would do. But I created a blog when I was training to be a teacher, and it became a space where I could talk about an interest in fashion, primarily because I felt left out. So visualize for a second you're me and you're going shopping. Where's the rail? Right? So I ask somebody and say, I'm really sorry, would you mind passing me down that check shirt in a size 6? Thank you very much. Don't judge the check shirt. I go to the changing room. If it's a door, where's the lock? If it's a curtain, I'm probably not strong enough to close it. So I walk into the changing room and I don't want to put the new garment on the floor. Where's the hook? Okay, so I try it on, that's fine, I'm going to buy it. I come out, where's the cash register? So for me, fashion has been something that I've always wanted to participate in, for a number of reasons. One, it gives me confidence. What I wear depends on my mood. But it also illustrates the fact that I'm not a child. From the back, there have been many instances where people have come to me and said, are you looking for your mammy? I'm like, no, I'm absolutely fine, thank you very much. Whereas you wear something like this and people make the assumption that you're not for it. But it has been an industry that I have been left out of, both from the construction of the design and the environment, but that I was never represented, whether it was in fashion magazines, whether it was in brands. And my way in was through education. I learned everything I could. But when I was 18 and had all of this information in my head and spoke to people about it, people would say, what would she know about fashion? She's 3'5" tall. The internet came a space where I could build a community of people who had a similar interest to me. It created a safe space where I am now consulting with the leading fashion brands in the world about making sure that the fashion industry is accommodating for disabled people, not just as customers, but also as employers. That never would have happened without the internet. You very kindly said that I was at Davos earlier this year and that I gave a TED talk in New York. That never would have happened without the internet. And for me, it's about using that tool in a very empowering way. And as been said by all of our panelists here, the problem isn't the technology. So what skills do young people and older people need to use this in a very effective way? It's the same skills we've always needed. They need confidence, a sense of belief, and resilience. So the next time somebody calls you a name on the internet, you realise that reflects badly on them, not on you. And yes, there is an ease at which you can be horrid on the internet. But you'll be really surprised about how easy some people can be horrid in real life too. And I think it is about encouraging us all to see this as a skill and as a tool which can change all of our lives. I mean, Twitter didn't exist 12 years ago. What's next? And instead of fearing it, as James very articulately said, we need to embrace that discomfort and be comfortable in our uncomfortableness. And look at it as an opportunity. Because by stifling it and by taking phones away from young people or from older people, who knows what they could do or what they could have been otherwise. And I think it's about looking at it as an opportunity to transform themselves and society. Does that answer your question?
Did you want to add anything to that, Grainia?
Yeah. Other than to add, this is not a problem that's too difficult to solve. And I felt, Mairead, after that case, which is, I think it's 2 or 3 months ago, it feels like a lifetime, I have to say. I don't think I've talked about any issue as much as I have in the last 2 to 3 months since that case happened. And it was unnervingly similar to a case that we dealt with about 18 months previously. In relation to a young girl who shared information, shared an intimate photo, and that photo had been shared further. So, you know, I said earlier, Childline sees these cases and listens to children years in advance before it becomes a nationally understood issue. But things have changed since then. You're absolutely right. It's like the public got and understood this issue. And what I'm concerned about is that we start to see it as a problem that's too difficult to solve. And no problem is too difficult to solve, but this one isn't either. And you're absolutely right, Sinead, we need everybody in the room on this. So yes, it is a really big issue, but who needs to be in the room? We need the state, government, Gardaí, all to sit down, and all the various different agencies and say, right, what's our role? And then we need to help, because I think it's incredibly difficult if you're the principal of a school or a teacher today to know what to do. And our job, collectively, is to figure out a way to enable schools to make the right decision. It's incredibly difficult to be a parent and know the right decision. And I can't tell you the amount of calls that we get from parents every day saying, help me, give me something that I can read that can help me protect my child. And we're failing parents if we don't ensure that there is publicly available information. And we're not, as we said already, bringing children into that room. So what does all that mean? Remember a number of years ago when road safety deaths were at the height that they were. And what did we do? As a state, we set up the Road Safety Authority, and we said we're going to have one organisation, and they're going to be charged with understanding the problem, doing the research, and helping us to make our young people, our children, everybody else safer. That's been a success story, that organisation. We all know it, the public information campaigns, anybody who cycles has their RSA jacket on. We need an office for a digital safety commissioner. Call it something sexier than that, please, but that's what we need it to be. And we need the state to invest in it, we need parents to support it, we need them to give parents the education that they need, we need them to put guidelines together for schools and all the other brilliant things that the RSA has done. And you're absolutely right, industry needs to be part of that, so we need to get the companies in the room too, but they will. I have no doubt they will, because it's in everybody's interest. But that's the point, is when that case happened, it hit the public consciousness and everybody said, oh, this is too difficult. It's not too difficult. But we can't keep talking about it. Now is the time we actually have to do it. And there have been some good announcements from government, and I think there is a really strong intent here. But that's the key. This has to be the year in which we fix this, and as we said, children have to be in that room.
Now, would anybody like to, have we got some questions here? I'm sure there's, would you go first?
Yeah, thanks very much, Audrey. That was very interesting. I more or less agree with you, Sinead, when you said that the problem isn't the internet, the problem is people. I more or less agree with that. But I do think people's behaviour online is an awful lot harder than it is in reality. In other words, if somebody, I often think it's like road rage. You know, you can have somebody who's quite a nice person until they get behind the wheel of a car and somebody cuts them off, and the next thing they become like really aggressive because they feel kind of insulated. And when you're not eyeballing somebody, it's very easy to be a whole lot meaner online. So I do think there is a problem with the internet as well. I don't think it's just people's behaviour. I have two particular things as a parent I want to ask James. Because outside of kind of mainstream bullying, when you are parenting teenagers whose moods go like this, and you can have bad days and bad weeks and all the rest of it, it's very difficult as a parent who's very conscious of not obviously saying, I'm switching off the Wi-Fi, or I'm going to take your phone. You know that they are constantly, they're feeling very down about whatever, and they're constantly on their phone, and they're on Instagram, they're on Snapchat, they're not on Facebook, and they're watching all their mates, and nobody Instagrams, as far as I can see, or Snapchats a really bad day, or a really boring event. You know, they're all having, so your teenager thinks, they're all having a great time, they're all out, tripping the light fantastic, and I'm sitting here, crying into my porridge. How do you, my temptation is, the voice in your head is constantly, put your bloody phone away, stop looking at, that's not real, they're only, showing you all the good things and blah, blah, blah. That's number one, and I can't remember what the other thing was that I wanted to ask you about, but I have it written here. Yeah, and the other thing is, if they are coming under pressure from friends, is the 24-hour nature, again, of the type of bullying, or the softer side of that, the fact that they can't get away from it. In my day, if there was somebody being mean to you, or even if everybody was being mean to you in school, at least when you came home it stopped. Whereas now it doesn't, and it can, kids go to sleep with their phones, and I know if a kid isn't sleeping and they're on the phone at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning, and that's very hard to counter as well. So as a parent, how do I, without sounding like the Methuselah, try and deal with that? Thank you.
Oh God.
Well, let me get a little bit worse while you sort this out.
Well, I always tell my kids now. Well, I always use my sister as a kind of barometer, because she's a mom. She has 2 kids, Sean and Sarah, and they're like 13 and 14, so they're at that age where they're glued to their phones and that kind of thing. But I'm not saying you're a bad parent or anything, but she kind of is she's quite strict with them, as in they don't go to bed with the phones, and that's just the law of the land. That's been set out from the get-go.
Okay, my own defence, mine are older, but carry on.
You just got to pull harder then. But she also is, on Instagram you can be logged into the same account on multiple phones. So she's logged into Sarah's Instagram on her phone. So she's constantly breezing in and looking at her messages, because she is too young, I guess, to not be kind of casting an eye on and making sure it's okay. So she's kind of keeping an eye, because I think if kids are a little bit boxed in with their feelings and stuff like that, a good way to kind of get a sense of it is, and I guess the old-fashioned way was maybe read their diary, but maybe it's to have a scan of their messages that they're sending friends or that they're receiving, to make sure they aren't being bullied. So I think this is more for parents of younger kids. It's just being dual logged in to their social media accounts on your phone, so you can cast an eye and make sure nothing bad is happening. But also just kind of teaching them the realities. Yeah, it's like when you meet up with friends that you haven't seen in a while, you do automatically tell them the positive stuff and tell them what's going on in your life. You just got engaged, you just got a house, blah, blah, blah. You don't necessarily slide in and tell them all the negative stuff. So it's the same on social media. You do kind of tend to celebrate the happier moments online. So it's kind of just about, I guess, making sure your kids know reality, and that they do know that they're not going to share generally when they're having a bad day, it's when they're down at the beach with an ice cream because that looks cute on Instagram. They're not going to share a picture of them crying in the room or whatever. But I think people have ups and downs, and it's about kind of knowing how to communicate that to your child. Is that anyway useful?
I'm trying to work out, I was hoping for the nugget that I could go home and say, James Kavanagh said. Get me off the hook.
Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, two things. Sorry. I've been present at a lot of these conversations, and the perspective always is everyone's afraid that their child will be bullied. But statistically, actually, it's going to be more likely that your child is the bully. They're in the majority. So what do you do when you find out, you get the call from school, your child has been texting someone and your child has been causing someone, trouble. And the other one is bystanders. And I really loved your story about that guy, David, who stopped it. And I was ferociously bullied in school and have been online. And I was always angrier at my friends who wouldn't stop it. They had that power. So how do you, teach people, okay, fine, the smart thing to do is keep your head down and not intervene, but morally, you have an obligation to actually intervene.
I mean, on the first point, there's never going to be a right or wrong answer to this, but you're absolutely right. Statistically and in terms of probability, yes, there are likelihoods that your child will bully or will be bullied, or could be one or both at various different points in their childhood. From our experience, essentially it's down to the quality of the relationship that you have with your child. And I loved what you said, James, about it takes a village to raise a child. And yes, it is a bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's true. And, and oh, how lucky those children are to have an uncle who will genuinely say, I am responsible. It's not just the parent, I'm responsible. So children tell us, I want to be listened to, I want to be heard. Every child always wants more time with their parents or their uncle or their aunt or whoever it is. So, as I say, what our experience has been, if you do get that call, then of course you need to have the conversation with the child. But I would say listen and really listen, because in the vast majority of cases, some young people literally have no idea of the consequences of their actions. And some young people will ring us and say, I've just been called a bully. I had no idea that was bullying. And they'll ring us and they're extremely upset. And we will work with that child. And in fact, I happened to be in Childline around Christmas, and we got a call from a child who rang, who had been a bully and had bullied earlier in the year, and had been in regular contact with us throughout the year. And children love ringing us at Christmas to say thank you. It is a really nice time to be around Childline. It's also a very difficult time, because some children have very difficult times around Christmas. But this particular child, when I was in, was calling to say, I've had a much better year, and now I'm getting on. And there were a whole range of inherent reasons why that child was bullying. But for them, it wasn't bullying. They were trying to tell everybody, listen to me, I've got a problem. And there was other stuff going on. So that's a rambling answer, but I think it all comes back to what's the quality of the relationship that child has with anyone. And it doesn't need to be the parent, they need one person to do that.
I'd just follow up on that very briefly. It's a microcosm of an example, but I just ask, yes, first and foremost, that you listen to that child, but also modulate your own feelings and emotions, because your immediate reaction is probably embarrassment because you feel it reflects on your parenting. And to give you an example of something that happens to me every day, although it's not bullying, I'll be walking through a supermarket and a child will be like, Mammy, look at that little woman. What's the parent's immediate reaction? Get away from them. And what they are telling that child is that I am not something to look at. But it comes out of the parent's embarrassment because they feel that it is a reflection on them. And actually what they have told that child is almost that I'm not something to interact with. Now that entire situation can be resolved really quickly by the adult taking a step back, almost reining in their own emotions and going, yeah, that is a little woman. Why don't you say hello? And he'll go, hiya. And I'll go, hello. And he'll walk off. And often I think as adults, we place ourselves in the middle of it, and that's very difficult not to do as human beings. And often we need to remove ourselves. And as you said, just be there for those most affected. And that can be really, really difficult. But I think if we're constantly trying to tell ourselves it's not about us, or at least initially.
Yeah, and like totally echoing what you said. I think kids can be as intelligent as you allow them to be. And I think there's a lot of like just automatic shielding when it comes to smaller kids in terms of what's going on in the political world and what's going on with sex education and stuff. There's a lot of, oh, they're too young to listen to that now. And like, you know, when again, using my niece and nephew's brothers, but they're very worldly because nothing was off the table when you know, they were coming over for dinner or whatever. We talk about what's going on in politics, you know, being safe with your body. My sister was never one to shield them, and I can kind of see the fruits of it now. They're really tolerant of people, they're really accepting, they have empathy, they're always, like I told them my bullying story, and they're always now wanting to be the David. They're always like seeking around the school, looking for people getting bullied, looking for the quiet ones. So I think we need to actually not shield children as much and expose them to more real life.
But because they have access it through social media, they're now hearing stories or first-person interests from around the world. I, like yourself, James, go into schools all the time. And you know, hearing 6th class students talking about Emma Gonzalez giving an incredible speech at March for Our Lives, and you're like, how do you know? And they are so, to use the overword phrase, woke in many ways, that we really undermine their intelligence and their empathy and what they're interested in, and we belittle that as adults because it wasn't our experience.
Can I also add to that, sorry Sinead? If we are talking about bystanders, what we do talk about in schools sometimes is just changing kind of bystanders to upstanders. So there is a difference of just bystanding, because often we would encourage our children, you know, keep away if there's a fight. When they come home and tell you there was a fight in the playground, well, what did you do? I hope you weren't in it. As opposed to, well, did you ask if that person was okay, or did you check in? So what we do when we talk to parents about building empathy, one of the things is literally, again, conversations, but asking questions like, what happened today in school? And, you know, when that happened, what did you do? And getting them to check in on their own responses from a very young age, and building in this kind of civic responsibility. And they don't have to go and stop the fight because that might be too dangerous, but they may just go around about afterwards and talk to the victim, which may mean a serious amount to the victim, you know, after that. So if you are worried that maybe your child is aggressive, or that you know, there's things that you see them do to their other siblings, you just need to start the conversation straight away and start checking in. Well, when you did that, how did that other person feel? That can be really powerful.
But also not taking the answer. Often what used to happen in my classroom is children would go home and parents would say, what did you do today? And the child would say, nothing. And
what did you talk about today, or what did you play?
So it's rephrasing the question and not taking the answer that they're willing to give you, because what I have found, at least in my research, in terms of trying to articulate the voice of the child, children are so smart. They will give us the answers that they think we want to hear. And it is very difficult to get beyond that, both as a teacher and as a parent, but you really need to work hard at it, and it is about angling your questions differently.
And also maybe, sorry, but maybe being a role model too. Exactly. And the online is very easy. You can be a very good role model. I mean, look at how much time you spend on your phone.
Yes.
Do you ask for consent from your child before you put a picture of them up on Facebook? Mm-hmm. You know, so just literally acting in the way that you want your child to act in every...
And being present. My parents are on Snapchat purely to send photos of the dog because they believe it is a faster medium than WhatsApp. But I think having a cognizance of that, you can't expect your children to know everything if you're not willing to participate too.
Any other questions?
Just to convolute the old man's question.
Please do.
A lot of parents nowadays, they both work. They both work. Yeah. And they have their mortgages and their bills and everything to pay. Do they have time to speak to the kids? I find that I have no problem talking to my grandchildren, and they listen to me, and I can talk freely and openly. Whereas when the kids were growing up, the pressures didn't allow, plus the fact that they didn't have internet or anything like that. So grandparents, I recently, my wife, attended the class of transition your students in the local school, how to use the iPhone and that, laptops and everything. And the deal was, when you finished the course, you would have a chat with the students. They were absolutely brilliant. They opened up about everything, which amazed me, because I was an old fogey. And I told them my life experiences, you know, immigrating and working away from home. And they opened up, told me things that I was absolutely mind-boggling. And maybe it was the fact that I was just older and had more experience. But I think the grandparents play a big role, and I'm sure the panel could And that will make it more, anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I'm just in the process of learning how important grandparents are. In fact, I wouldn't be here if there weren't grandparents literally here today. Thank you for that. And your grandchildren are very lucky, I have to say. Very lucky grandchildren. And to answer your question, everything I have learned from my colleagues and the volunteers who listen say it's not about the quantity of time, it's about the quality of time. So do any of us ever feel we have enough time for each other, whether it's children or husbands or friends? Never. We never feel we have enough time. But it's about when you're there, as someone has said, being really present and properly listening and giving space for conversation. So I would say, let's all ease up on ourselves a little bit and give ourselves a bit of a break. And we're doing far, far better. You're absolutely right, James. We're doing far, far better than we think we are. We put a lot of demands on our time. When we ask young people, all they simply say to us is, I just want a bit of time. Just a little bit of time. And it doesn't always mean talking. It just means having a bit of silence, actually, sometimes. And I love the point that you said about, young people and what you learned from them. And I'd love, if we could almost have that as a national aspiration in our national development plan. Let's all listen to children a bit more. I think that would solve a lot of problems. I also, I don't want anyone to think, like, we've had a very positive and optimistic conversation here today, and that is very important. But again, to the point, I don't think any of us, and I certainly can only speak for myself, I'm certainly not saying, unlimited access all of the time. None of us are saying that. In the same way, I think cake is lovely. I wouldn't suggest we all eat cake all of the time. So I think, we still have to make decisions as adults, and we still have to, with children and young people, make decisions about what are the boundaries and what are the standards and what, so how much time young people spend online. And I would never say to a parent, this is it. It is genuinely going to have to be down to the parent with the child and the young person, because it comes down to the reason you're online, what you're trying to do when you're online, and as I have a colleague of mine somebody I know who works in Canada, and she runs a charity that teaches young women how to code. And she will constantly say coding and technology is completely different from online. So this is not just a conversation about online, it's also about technology. Technology is a fantastic opportunity for young people to learn. So if we confuse the two, we'll think actually you can only spend an hour online and that's your learning space. It's not. We need to enable children to learn much more online too. So we do need to be applying boundaries and not be naive about that either.
So just on that note, a school near Bríannagh, just outside Trinity, with parents and board of management and teachers, they have banned the use of smartphones after school and out of school for 11 weeks. What is your opinion of that?
I had a feeling we'd be asked like that. Well, I think you phrased it, well, look, first of all, as I said earlier, it's very, very difficult to be a principal, a decision maker in a school with, I have no doubt, and I don't know this particular case, I haven't been close to it, with no doubt a lot of questions and pressure from parents, what are we all doing in this space? So I would ask the question, how involved were the children and young people, and were their views taken account of? That's not to say that they dictate it either, okay? So I'm not saying, oh, if kids think this, then that's obviously in their best interest. The principal has to make the decision of what's in the best interest of their education. So yes, mediating, moderating, and setting boundaries there is really important. I think what I would also say is, don't underestimate the extent to which technology and access online enables a child's education. So I want to understand, and I know UCD are doing loads of work into that, and I would say the research is showing more rather than less, actually. And I think my third point is, I would look to the international research here, because there are a lot of countries who have made those decisions and are now changing and reintroducing in a moderated and a mediated way. So I think that case is a really interesting one. And wouldn't it be wonderful, as I said earlier, if we had a national organisation that could provide guidance to schools in that, so that individual schools didn't feel completely at sea and forced to make an individual decision. And it's a very, very difficult place for a principal to be in. So I have huge sympathy. But always look to the research and look to the evidence. And I think the evidence in this one points to a much more moderated rather than an outright ban.
Well, look, he did actually say, he acknowledged that there is a place for young people to be engaging with an online, and digital research and technology in the classroom, but he felt like that has to be monitored, they have to be educated, and that's the reason he made the call, because he felt it wasn't monitored. So he was quite progressive in that sense. He saw the benefits, but at the moment they're trying to see how much they can monitor it. So he's quite, in one sense, he's being proactive, trying something. Do you know what?
There's also an age factor involved, because they're all children under 11, not teenagers, they're all pre-teens. And it's a question of whether they should have been allowed to be accessing Instagram and under that pressure at that age.
If you don't try something, nothing will change. So I guess at least he's trying, or the parents are trying. Oh no, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, we want to
It starts with a conversation, I suppose, is what we've been saying all the time. Derval, you had a question?
Hi. It's just actually a follow-on question from Grainia, what you said about technology and the lack of women in technology. And if we have only men coding and predominantly white or Caucasian men who are involved in code, are you worried that a lot of the biases we have around gender, disability, ethnicity, age, class, and so many other things that we have kind of in the human world or the carbon world are going to be replicated and actually maybe amplified in the technology world if we do not get more women but also more diverse people into coding? Because that's one of my biggest fears as we move into AR, VR, artificial intelligence, and the lack of young women in engineering and in STEM. I actually think it's a new risk that we're going to face in the digital age.
I completely agree, and we're kind of, I think we're at a moment now in Ireland where we absolutely have to step back and say, is our national curriculum delivering for the kind of future that we want, both in terms of our economic capacity as a nation, so where do we want to be in 20 or 30 years' time as a nation in terms of our economic capacity and what we're delivering? What kind of opportunities do we want for our young people, and not just today's young people, but tomorrow's young, the children that aren't born yet? What kind of industries and sectors do we want to be developing, and how do we enable them through their education for that? And there's absolutely no question that our curriculum needs to be phenomenally modernised in order to ensure that all young people have access to whatever those new and emerging technologies are, be it coding, and to be honest, that's kind of an old conversation now. We should have been having that 10 years ago. So we've missed, I think, and this is a personal view, we've missed a trick in terms of not having coding on the curriculum 10 years ago, not now. I mean, it still needs to be there now. And on to the point that was made earlier as well, we have to ensure that our curriculum also enables children and young people to make the right decisions in terms of their sexual behaviour. We have to have a grown-up and a serious and a considerate conversation about that. So I suppose that kind of partly answers that question, Derval. But we're not. I don't think we're starting from the right place in terms of shaping our curriculum. What are the economic outcomes that we want, and what are the social outcomes that we want? And start by answering those questions and build your curriculum on that basis.
I just want to touch on that particularly, Derval. You kindly mentioned disability as regards to that, and in many ways, technology has been a vehicle for accessibility. But in some ways, it has been silent. And if I could ask you to do a number of things today, forevermore, if you were using technology. So Twitter has an inbuilt accessibility program as regards to visually impaired. There is an option that you can tick that every time you upload a picture, it offers you a caption, because screen readers don't read photos. So you need to put in a caption. When you're using hashtags, if you could capitalize every new word, because again, screen readers just read a jumble of letters. And up until the past 6 months, as regards to Twitter's terms of use and code of conduct, ableist attacks online were not covered, and a number of disability advocates, including myself, have petitioned Twitter to make sure that that is now included. But in many ways, it offers a whole new avenue and domain for people who are not included in the physical world. And I would ask you, as James was saying earlier, to not just be somebody who's standing by watching this occur, but also participate in how we can make technology much more inclusive for those who historically haven't been included.
Mairead, have you any thoughts on that?
No, I think they're pretty good. I mean, I do think that we do run the risk sometimes of we have to be very cautious, because it is very hard to be a principal in a school that if we say we'll solve all our problems just by curriculum, you know, we also run the risk of being very oversimplistic in our aims even. So if we are talking about how to get more women in STEM, or for, you know, have more, like, all of these are really good actual things we can do that we should be doing regardless of what we know about or what our kids are learning in school. But also we just need to be role models. We need to ensure that every level of every organisation, of every, you know, member in a community understands the issues that face anyone that's from in any way marginalised, you know, as opposed to just saying that they'll learn that in school.
Thank you. I'll take a final question if anybody. Yes.
It's not really a question, but I just have one kind of point to make. I suppose like in regards to parents monitoring their kids' behaviour, I was never in a position where my parents read my messages or read my diary, as Jamie said. And I'm sure back 20, 50 years ago when that was happening, you'd storm off as any kid these days if your parents read your messages. And I just feel if that did happen, there would be a breach of trust. And I don't think you have to force, like as a teenager now in this day, I don't think I would feel respected if someone did do that. Since I've gone into primary school and secondary school, I've come home every day, told my parents how my history class was, who I talked to, everything. So I don't think that would happen if I felt there was that breach of trust there. So that's just kind of...
Thank you so much. That's great. I think maybe in James's defence, you might have been talking maybe younger children.
Maybe when certain age hits, then you kind of back away and stop being nosy. But it's more, I guess, my niece was like 11, 12, so she's casting an eye. But yeah, no, you're dead right. You don't want two nosy parents.
And if you have the skills yourself, to navigate it and to know where to go if you need help, then you're sitting very nicely.
And to make sure you give those resources to, you either have them as a young person yourself or give them to children, whether it is the ISPCC, I don't know if you all know the number for Childline, it's 1800 666 666. Thanks, Sinead. You're welcome. Or going to spunout.ie, there are a number of excellent resources that are available for young people and for their parents. Make sure you know them, particularly in times where they're not moments of crisis, because when you're panicking, you definitely won't be able to find them.
And to the parents in the room, we get calls from parents who are devastated that their child is called Childline, because to that point earlier, oh my God, am I a bad parent? No, actually, if your child is calling Childline, you're probably a brilliant parent, because you've helped them to know that there's something there, a service that's there to listen to them. And the children who call us, you'd be amazed the amount of times they call and they say, okay, I have this problem and I want to tell mum or I want to tell dad, but I want to tell you first because I need to figure out how to say it. And so many of our calls are simply children and young people who are trying to articulate something. And you know what it is with all of us. When you say it out loud, it's real, so it's quite scary when you say it out loud. So when they call us first, it's because they're on their way to telling the person that they're ready to tell. And that's part of what we do, is encourage them where they can. So please don't worry if you suddenly find that your child is calling Childline. And I would really ask, if it's not on their phone, help them to put it on their phone. Because I'd love that to be the case.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've had a fantastic discussion today. We've covered a lot of ground. I particularly want to thank Bríannagh, because it was her idea to have this. She's created a very positive, empowering event, and I think that's a great tribute to you, so thank you very much. I also want to thank the panel. I want to thank Grainia, Sinead, Mairead and James, and thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.